Get started, and here we go. All right, good evening, graduate UNSY students. First, just for everybody's awareness, we are recording this session. You should have all received the audio acknowledgement of that. A copy of this recording is going to be made available for those who are unable to attend this session live. Next, for the format of tonight's meeting, I'm going to start by introducing our guest, who will discuss her connection to advanced air mobility and the U.S. Department of Transportation's AAM Interagency Working Group. Afterwards, I'm going to lead a series of introductory questions. Then we're going to open up the session to class-wide Q&A. I do ask that you all mute your mics, save any questions for the end, and that you use the hand raise icon to indicate when you do have a question. I'm going to call on each of you in order. And with that, I am just really thrilled to welcome you to the 30th session of the UNSY Guest SME Speaker Series, the third and final for the term. I'm Dr. Brent Terwilliger, the Program Coordinator for the Master of Science in Uncrewed and Autonomous Systems degree here at Embry-Riddle Worldwide. Tonight, we are joined by our guest subject matter expert, Mrs. Saracina Tuchen. Mrs. Tuchen is the Senior Scientist in the Highly Automated Systems Safety, or HASS, Center of Excellence in the U.S. Department of Transportation, Office of the Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology. She is a part of a team of national experts aimed to support the USDOT in reviewing, assessing, and validating highly automated systems for safety. Mrs. Tuchen has over 30 years of experience in both private industry and federal government. Prior to her federal service, she was a group vice president of engineering at Digitas. Over the last 20 years, she's been the technical lead of many of the FAA's next-gen air transportation system technologies and platforms, including the System-Wide Information Management, or SWIM, and advanced surveillance systems that are modernizing the U.S. national airspace system. In addition, she was the USDOT's on-site lead at the NASA Ames Research Center, working with NASA researchers to integrate advanced automation technologies to increase the air traffic capacity and efficiency of our national airspace system. Before the advanced air mobility industry working groups were established, she worked with NASA on highlighting the importance of multimodal integration for the success of integrating these new airspace vehicles that will complement and complete this with surface transportation. She has been an expert panelist, a national working group member, a principal author, and an international conference technical chair on emerging multimodal air transportation technologies and standards. She has also authored numerous papers related to urban and advanced air mobility, led a multimodal team to develop a set of tools for stakeholders, such as city and state planners, so that they can start planning for AAM integration into their cities. And also, she serves as the program manager of the USDOT's AAM Interagency Working Group's Automation Strategy Subgroup. Sarasina earned a BS in Electrical Engineering from Purdue University and an MS in Engineering Economic Systems from Stanford University. And with that, let's give a warm welcome to Saracina. I'm thrilled to turn the stage over so she can share where this technology and infrastructure are headed in the evolution of our NAS.
All right, great. Thank you, Brent. Thanks for having me, and thanks for putting me quickly on the schedule as we're reeling into a government shutdown. I have a few slides, so I'm going to start sharing my screen if that's okay. Am I able to share my screen? Okay. I'm happy to. What did you say? Did you say something?
Should be it.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Can everybody see this? Can everyone see my
Yes.
screen? It should say Advanced Air Mobility Interagency Work. I just want to make sure I'm sharing the right screen.
Yep.
Okay, because I'm used to Teams, and I could put it on presenting mode. Is this better? Or is this reversed? Zoom is sort of weird. Are you seeing the big screen or are you seeing the small screen?
Right now it's the I'm seeing the just the working screen where you edit the document, the PPT.
Geez, okay. That's just so strange. I don't know how to, let me see, black, toggle, oh. Nope, it, more slide options, let me just see, screen. It's really strange here. I have it set up Zoom. I mean, the Teams does it correctly, and then this one doesn't. So I don't know if there's a duplicate way.
It's in presentation.
Yeah, I know it's in presentation mode, but you're saying you're not seeing the big presentation screen. You're seeing
correct.
Yeah,
this is the duplicate.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get it to so that the screens reverse, because that's what Zoom allows me to, I mean, not Zoom. Okay, so now it doesn't show anything. You know, I guess I'm just going to go back to the regular. So
usually if you go to display settings on the top left there, and you click reverse, then one to the right of that.
To the right?
Display settings to the right of your cursor.
Display settings to the right of my cursor.
On the top of the screen?
Yeah, I don't see it there. It's not display settings to the right.
It's between show taskbar and slideshow.
Show taskbar and slideshow. I don't have that on my, is it right? I see show taskbar.
So go to the right just a little bit more.
Here. I don't see slideshow. I don't see what you're saying. There's disable, hide video panel, disable annotations, stop recording. It doesn't, like, there isn't one there.
No worries. One thing that in the past we've done when we've run into kind of challenges with PowerPoint, we've exported them as PDFs, and then we can just walk through a PDF.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna stop sharing this. I don't need to, I'm not sure, stop sharing this. I'm gonna get out of presenter mode because it's not really saying that, you know, there's hide presenter, there's hide, you know, hide presenter view. Okay, is that better?
Work?
Okay.
That worked. That did it. We are golden.
Why does hide presenter view work? I don't have no idea. Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you guys, since you are, can you tell me your master's again? I've never heard of this before. It's an Uncrewed autonomy
and autonomous system degree. It's focused on the application, support, and development of uncrewed. Think of mobile robotics. So it's cross systems. It's a heavy focus on UAS, uncrewed aircraft systems. However, we do have a connection into space-based platforms, and as well as maritime and ground platforms. Okay. Because there's, the way we look at it is there's innovation and synergistic collaboration possibilities between all the operational modalities and environments.
Got it. All right. Well, this leads into, and I'm glad that you talked about the multimodal. So I wear two hats in the Office of the Secretary of Transportation. We are HAAS, Highly Automated Systems Safety Center of Excellence, was established by Congress in 2020. And we're composed of national experts across the country. I sit here in California. And, you know, we have perceptions expert, sensors perception expert that's out of Ohio. He was with the Air Force Research Lab. We've got Josh Every, who comes out of the NISTA Test Research Center, doing a lot with automated driving, the ground surface vehicles, and other staff coming from Federal Highway and across other industries. But anyway, as you mentioned, we're serving as the central expert within the USDOT for multimodal automation. And that leads to autonomy. We're composed of experts in computer science, data analytics, machine learning, sensors, and other technologies. You mentioned that our vision is the safe and responsible integration of automation across the transportation ecosystem. This was pushed through by Congress. Those of you that know see what's going on in the government, anything that gets pushed by Congress and has bipartisan support is something really important that people share. And so it's pretty much almost like an act of God if Congress pushes something through as a law. And so there's where I sit in the Haas COE, it's congressionally established 2020, and then also the Advanced Air Mobility Interagency Working Group, which was also, I'll explain that to you, is implementing the AAM Leadership and Coordination Act that was signed into law in October 2022. So our mission in the Haas COE is to have the federal capacity to review, assess, and validate the safety of automated technologies across the modes while enabling cross-sector collaboration for a holistic approach to the safe integration of automation transportation. So we just don't focus on aviation, though for the last 20 years I have focused in the aviation systems. AAM is one of those new types of vehicles that is now, we see it as the inflection point where it's no longer going from airport to airport, but short hops between vertiport to vertiport, and the scale and the economics and the scale and the cost benefits really require that first mile and last mile integration. So it really needs to be multimodal. I mentioned, so Brent, you sound like you're familiar with the Advanced Air Mobility Coordination Leadership Act. Is that right? Or did you reply back to the RFI that the department sent out?
No, I didn't lead our response to that. But I've had some involvement with AAM through part of the work that NASA and the FAA did with Deloitte. I was one of the subject matter reviewers on their ConOps.
Got it. Okay. I have to send this. Okay. So I mentioned that President Biden signed that into law last year, October 17th, 2022. So that's just a link to the text. I'm sure you've read it before. I would say, if you get a chance to read it, it's not that long, but it's really good reading. Senator Moran was the senator that pushed this bill through Congress. And basically what it is they want DOT to lead an all-of-government interagency working group to create the national strategy for AAM, how AAM can scale, that industry would be able to scale in the operations. What we see is that even if the industry was really pushing for it, if they get type certification, which are most of the people here familiar with the aviation certification? I'm just trying to
Okay. Yeah, we have a mix of folks that are they could be UAS Part 107 specific all the way up to man-rated certified operators, military pilots, commercial ATP, etc. So it's
Okay.
we have a wide bit of folks on here.
All right. So, just stepping back, the aviation world is based on type certification, right, for vehicles. The surface world, like that's why you could throw out a Tesla out there with full service driving, or whatever they call it, FSD, their automated driving system, because they're self-certification. They deliver minimal viable product. They have to meet NHTSA requirements. However, the type certification process in the FAA is much more rigorous. And so this would take years to do. These are new types of vehicles, and even though that many of these companies, as you know, like Joby, Archer, I think Joby got $1.8 billion of funding. They're actually burning at a huge rate. I think Joby's burning about $1 million a day. And so that amount of money may take them into 2025. So they really need a path to get through type certification. And then even if that vehicle is type certified and has airworthiness, that doesn't mean that it's going to have the charging infrastructure, the energy to scale. So that's why this is an all-of-government approach, because these are new vehicles, not just from the type certification, but it's a convergence of electrification, new propulsion technologies, and autonomy. And that requires new infrastructure, new methods for certification, new ways that we can come up with policies, frameworks, and procedures around autonomy. This is just a timeline of the Interagency Working Group. So the act I mentioned was signed into law in October. Right now we are in what's called a review and examination period through February 2024. And the year review and interagency drafting and the engagement of these stakeholder interactions, we have 12 stakeholder groups, and I'll go through them. One of them is academia, so this counts for me as I'm engaging with academia. The biggest group obviously is the industry, the manufacturers, the OEMs. We also have the state, local, tribal governments. We have the emergency responders. We have all the labor unions. As we're doing, I call the shift to autonomy. This isn't just an automation, really a Promethean type of moment, meaning that, jobs are going to change with AI and automation and autonomy. Pilots, a lot of the companies are pushing for autonomous packages, not just on new vehicles, but on current cargo carrying aircraft that they want to be able to fly these autonomously for cargo because of the pilot shortage. So there's jobs that are changing, and you guys are in a really good master's program that this is the shift. We are living in it right now. As part of this review and examination period, the monthly interagency working group, I mentioned that it's an all-of-government. So DOT is leading it, but we have Department of Commerce. I mentioned the jobs issue, Department of Labor, Department of Education. I mentioned energy. These are electrified aircraft. There's EVs going on. Everything's becoming electrified. There's issues to the power grid, new sources of power. So Department of Energy is involved. FCC, because spectrum, now these are low altitude. There are interference. There's not enough spectrum once we scale these, especially with also 5G in the cars and there's not enough spectrum. So they're also involved, FCC and TIA. It's also security, and physical security, right? Because there's new infrastructure like vertiports. So TSA is involved. These things fly, they could become weaponized. Department of Homeland Security is involved. So it's an all of government approach, and all agencies are required to have representation. We have monthly interagency working groups, and we have subgroups, and I'll go over the subgroups. So we have an executive group, and I just wanted to mention how the Department of Transportation is set up. So, Brent, you're familiar with the DOT, right? Or are you, and how FAA reports into the DOT?
Yes.
Okay, so we call this, so the Office of the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary of Transportation is Pete Buttigieg. They call him S1. The Deputy Secretary of Transportation is Polly Trottenberg, and Polly Trottenberg, all the operating administrations in the DOT, like the FAA, NHTSA, Federal Highway, MARAD, Pipeline Administration, all report into Polly, who's also doing double duty as the FAA administrator, because they have nominated a FAA administrator, but it's not confirmed. And then the Undersecretary of Transportation is Carlos Monier, and he is the head of policy and research across the department. So things like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the AAM Coordination Leadership Act, all the big policy things go through him. So he is technically the lead of the AAM IWG. And then we have these subgroups, and I mentioned, and Brent, we have mostly DOT leads. So with an interagency lead. So I am the program manager for the automation strategy, and the technical lead is a guy named Parimal Kopardekar, PK, from out of NASA. You probably know him. He's the developer of UTM. And then we have Mike Harden, who's the program manager on DOT side for security requirements. He comes out of TSA, but he's now with us in the OST. And then I can't remember the woman's name, who's the technical lead with DHS and TSA. For Air Traffic Federation, that is Sean, it used to be Chris Loring out of FAA Next Gen. And I think the lead, I can't remember who the technical lead is for Air Traffic Federation. But there's a couple subject matter experts for that. Infrastructure development, the program manager out of DOT is Brian Steinbach. And there are two kind of leads from the interagency side. One's from NASA, Nancy Mendoza, and the others from FAA is Carrie Lyons from airports. And infrastructure is a huge area. It covers spectrum, vertiports, communication, navigation, facilitation, cybersecurity, these remote operating centers that would need to be developed once we scale to remote operations, the multimodal capability, weather, I'll get to that, and energy. And last but not least, and I want to emphasize this, it's sort of like you get a plane flying out there, but the community role, state, local, and tribal governments, especially at the community level, they have all the land use planning. When we sent out the RFI, I think there were 100 comments coming from LA, which was supposed to be one of the early sites that, not in my backyard. This is a transport for the rich, blah, blah, blah. So where the rubber meets the road is at the community roles, at the community. You're not going to see these low flying taxis in your area unless the community accepts it. And that's really how it works. So there's a lot of work that needs to be public engagement. I mean, communities, I think it was Open Skies Foundation. They were like, we don't want any more noise. This is noise pollution. However, these are, because they're electrified. I mean, I've seen these fly, and you've probably seen the videos. One of them is, it's only between 55 to 65 dB. They are extremely low noise. They're a different source of noise, but they are low noise. And the community is really, and this administration is all about equity and accessibility and the economics. Equity is a big piece because we really haven't redesigned the transportation system since Eisenhower, right? Eisenhower, that's how we got all the general aviation airports. I think there's 5,028 general aviation airports, very underutilized, but they were developed under the Eisenhower administration. And the Eisenhower administration also developed what you see now as the Federal Highways program. And many federal highways were run through poorer communities. I mean, you get the picture. So we really need to look at, this is a new transportation, multimodal transportation system that is more equitable than what we had in the past.
It should be uniting, not divisive.
Exactly. And, I mentioned the automation. Those are just some of the areas that we look at testing, how to test it, certify, the maturity capability, the roadmap, all the issues that automation is required. And a lot of the big issues are supply chain, national security. So DOD, I forgot to mention, the Department of Defense is also involved in the IWG. And they also pushed for this. Is those that don't know, we actually did lose the drone race. There was a drone, 90% of the drones are made in China. The DOD did not want us to fall behind in AAM. So they're very involved. There's 3 DoD people that are on my automation strategy group. And it's not just about that we're the leaders in the aviation space. That'd be great if we are, I don't care, but it's about if we're not having them fly domestically, and then we also lose that supply chain. That supply chain would go overseas. And that's the main concern, because they see a national security issue in supply chain. And because these are electrified, even more, because most of batteries, I think 90% of the batteries and the raw materials and the chemistry is all manufactured in China. And I want to just kind of also stress that workforce is also a big piece in this. So when we got together, this was a month before. So I was selected into this office a week before the Advanced Air Mobility Coordination Leadership Act was signed. About a month before this, I attended this working group to say, well, with these new types of vehicles, with not just AAM, but we also have trucks now, everything's becoming electrified. And with electrification, you can now build those autonomous platforms with a lot of AI software, etc., where you don't need a driver. And so what is this transportation system of the future? It's multimodal. China does things like autonomous corridors where they're fully 3-dimensional, where they'll have AV trucks, they'll have drones flying over them, real multimodal autonomous corridors. And we need to work across agencies to make this happen. This is the first time, actually, with AAM that now aviation has always been outside of has been a mode that really hasn't been integrated with all the other modes because it was always airport to airport. Now that's changing with AAM. It's not airport to airport. It's going to be vertiport within cities and general aviation airports. It relies on first and last mile for seamless. So that's the shift. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the automation strategy because this group is, focused on autonomy and autonomous systems. So when we first met as a group and we kicked off the Interagency Working Group, we met as a group, I think in March was our first working group. And we had to come up with a mission. And so this is our mission. So we're a subgroup. We're meeting with the AAM community and stakeholders to formulate a national policy and research roadmap for safe and efficient integration of increasingly automated and autonomous AAM flight operations in the national airspace system. And everybody realized in order to do this, we need a roadmap. There's no roadmap. Nobody knows how to go from A to C or D, meaning that the industry, the way that they want to go through it is they know they have to have an onboard pilot. They know they have to have type certification. So we'll start with initial operations, which will have an onboard pilot, but where their best economic benefit use cases is really once they can establish remotely pilot operations and then autonomous remotely supervised flight operations. Whisk is one of the companies that wants to jump, see how everybody else does this, but they want to jump at the end. They're just focused on autonomous remotely supervised flight operations as they see that's their best business case. You get rid of a pilot, you'll have all your seats available. And they're focusing on that supervised operations center. They were just bought by Boeing. So they're, doing a lot of the testing of that and being funded by Boeing. And we want this roadmap. This will be, in the national strategy, and it'll address these operational, functional, safety assurance, and policy requirements. However, we realize that there's challenges and gaps and all of that. So the national strategy has to address what our challenges and gaps are right now to get to this roadmap. I mentioned the stakeholder engagement for when we met as initial group in the automation and autonomy world. Who are the main people that we would want to engage with? These are the 12 stakeholder groups identified in the bill that we're required to actually engage with. The manufacturers of aircraft avionics, commercial air carriers, commercial operators, including helicopter operators, and intended operators. Some of these companies want to be operators and manufacturers. So the Jobies, also the X-Wings, Reliable Robotics, and we also are engaging with the airports. We see a lot of comments and engagement around the underutilized general aviation airport, especially in rural areas, and how we can revitalize them. Many of them, especially many of the regional airports, have lost service. And so how to bring that back into the communities. And it's about community access. We've also engaged with ALPA and ATCA. And incidentally, those labor unions, let's face it, this is a graduate school. American Airlines just their pilots just gave themselves a 40% raise, right? Because of the pilot shortage. And they don't want autonomy. because they feel that's a threat to their job. They can get their six-figure job. I don't look at this as a zero-sum game. You know, they can keep their jobs for the big aircraft and, you know, Part 135, all that. But this is opening up and lowering the barriers for other people, like pilots take, you know, it's $40,000 to $60,000 to become an air transport pilot. Most people can't afford being that pilot. And you get into simplified vehicle operations, remote operation centers, you're opening up new jobs. So I see there's much more jobs being created than losing them, right? So that's kind of the public engagement and the strategy that we have to put in the strategy. Yes, I mean, we can actually have more flights in the air with autonomous. So we're not stuck with just 55,000 flights per day in the National Airspace System. And that's that's the capacity we're at right now. So automation, also autonomy. We work with aviation training, the maintenance. There's a lot of jobs that are changing based on the maintenance of the electrification and distributed propulsion. There are so many more jobs being created with that. So they don't have right now maintenance providers for these new vehicles. Anybody?
We saw that similar argument in the UAS side of things early on in the 2012 to really lead up to Part 107 and 2017. Now, if you look, you'll see a lot of folks in that commercial aviation space have looked at small UAS technologies. You'll see them employing it in creative and novel ways that prior to that, they viewed it very much as a competition. We've been able to help, I guess, expand the perception of it, that it's a tool that can exist in their toolkit and still make them strong aviators, still aviation professionals. And I think, I'd like to think that we'll get there with autonomy and automation and, you know, large scale commercial aviation, where they'll start to recognize the benefit of the safety aspect, as well as it can enhance and increase the just volume of flights, so we can handle more people more efficiently in a safer manner.
Yeah.
All around increasing economic benefit.
Absolutely. So when we did these stakeholder engagement, as you mentioned, we had overarching themes. You know, there are benefits to automation, the safety enhancing benefits that you mentioned. There's economic benefits, you know, training, labor, addressing the pilot shortage. We even see benefits today where they're not even type certified. For example, it's replacing, you know, automation, as we know, replaces the 3Ds, dangerous, dirty, and dull. So the test pilots, these companies, Joby and Archer and Whisk, they're not using test pilots. They are remotely piloting this aircraft, and it's not until they do all the edge cases, well, they'll put a pilot on board. So we're already saving lives. Test pilots were a very dangerous profession. That's not happening. And societal, we see new jobs, manufacturing, the national security. And we keep seeing this, and, you know, Part 107 and UAS, as you mentioned, we have to evolve. The FAA came up with a safety continuum, and that risk tolerance must be agreed upon for every use case. So it's safety. We want to keep the safety standards, but for example, you might have less risk tolerance on an emergency responder case, right? Or even on drone inspections for bridges. You know, the total public benefit is greater than, you know, that risk of it falling. So the FAA is looking at evolving that safety continuum. when we talk about safety enhancing benefits, there's also this human machine teaming paradigm shift. And that is what, the FAA is trying to figure their way around. It's not that things are safer through, so what's happening is most of the physical tasks, like flying a plane and all the physical things that you need to do, are moving into the vehicle control system. So it's not that, it's actually you're shifting the risk from the actual physical pilot into the machine. So the machine now takes the risk. And so how do we then certify the safety of that machine? It's the same thing with the self-driving cars when there's this argument, right, between the states and the federal government. NHTSA was regulating the vehicle, but now and then the states regulate the operators of that vehicle. But now when the operator shifts into the vehicle, who's regulating that? Well, NHTSA didn't come up with a regulation, so the states took it over. But the car manufacturers are like, we don't want 50 different autonomy standards for 50 different states. So this technology is moving at a much greater speed than we have the policies and the rules for. And we keep hearing that we need this automation autonomy roadmap. How do you get from initial operations to fleet operations supervisory mode? And then we also hear, as I mentioned, when the physical tasks move into the machine and the vehicle control system, we need some new assurance methods to ensure the safety of the flying public. We do hear you. I mean, I'm glad that you guys have. How old is this master's, by the way? How long have you had this program?
So we launched in 2014, and we've had a couple different evolutions. When we first launched, we were extremely research heavy at 36 credits, and it worked toward a culminating capstone project. We've since worked with industry a little closer. We have a strong industry advisory board connection that helped us to kind of realign to their expectations so we can better prepare our students to engage the field immediately. That helped us to get it down to about 30 credits, which is consistent with a lot of science-based and engineering master's graduate degrees. And back then, by the way, we were known as the Master of Science in Unmanned Systems. Within the last 12 months, 18 months, we took a hard inward look and said, we need to make sure that we are consistent with the vernacular that is emerging around this technology. And that's where we came up with the uncrewed and autonomous systems, recognizing that we're not focused just on UAS, RPAS. It's scalable. It's we have folks where you are going to be completely teleoperating remotely, but it could have aspects of delegated authority all the way through to what we see in, say, a modern day elevator where you step in, you press a button and it goes. There's no operator on board anymore. So we want to make sure we cover that gambit. So long story short, we've been around almost a decade. Got it.
So that's awesome. So, we're hearing, these slides for ASTM International and their Aviation Autonomy Symposium. And, they also asked me a question, are you looking at autonomy? And if you aren't, why not? And yes, we are looking at autonomy. We know that there's this sense of urgency around autonomy. We've got EASA that's approved the Airbus 350 for single pilot operations. But I just want to clarify, AAM is not looking at single pilot operations. That's how they'll initially be on, because single pilot operations are for, large transport carriers. And so we're really looking from remote piloted to then autonomous supervised operations.
And that's the perfect example of the crawl, walk, run strategy in effect. This is exactly, I think, what the public wants to see is that notion of we're going to get there. We have a strategic plan to accomplish it, but we're not willing to compromise safety to do it. We are going to ensure that this technology is reliable, that we can build and maintain trust with it so that it works as we expect it to.
Right. So we've got that. We've got a number of companies, and you guys were familiar with it, like X-Win, Merlin Labs, and Reliable Robotics, that they're developing those increasingly autonomous cargo. They're developing autonomous packages that you put on existing already type certified aircraft. And they include all of the auto land, auto taxi, complete flight sensors and perception. So there's those companies that are doing that, and they're testing them in various missions, and also in areas like the UAS world did too. Like I think it's Merlin Labs that's doing a lot of these cargo missions out in New Zealand. So we also see these companies developing, the SVO thing. I'll go through simplified vehicle operations in a minute. I already talked about Boeing's acquisition, but the main thing here is that there's indication from everyone that I'm talking to. There's a leadership vacuum in moving to this autonomous environment. So, the industry, like Gamma is going to put this out. I put this on here just so that the graduate students can understand what I'm talking about. The industry is pushing out what's called simplified vehicle operations. And it's a great term. And really what it is it's the use of automation to reduce the number of skills a pilot or an operator in an aircraft must acquire to achieve the required level of operational safety. And it integrates, the vehicle's position and altitude in what they call a unified framework. I think they call it the unified control concept. And they are also integrating what they call synthetic vision systems, the large glass, the touch displays, all that to allow pilots to safely operate these highly automated SVO, simplified vehicle operations. But there hasn't been that research or the testing done around that. As I mentioned, when you're moving the physical task into the machine, safety has to be a big part of the design, the design and engineering concept. So those are two types of, they keep saying the simplified vehicle operations are safety enhancements, which they may be, right? But there needs to be that way to test those concepts and validate them as enhancing the safety of operations. So I think I don't have that much time, but this is a draft. This is just a draft of how we're looking at transitioning through into more autonomous operations. We do know in the near term, we're talking about like 2025, that Joby and Archer, they want, the initial operations, the infrastructure that's existing, the national airspace, since it's a low tempo, would be able to support it once they get type certified. And the automation benefits would be safety focused, those safety enhancing benefits of SVO, the synthetic vision system. We also want to start some of the initial energy infrastructure, because we don't need additional energy until 2035, right? When we're scaling these operations. In the near mid, we do want to see that we can do emergency response. This is a big push when I talk about community roles. They don't really care about air tax. They see that as a rich transport. Help show me that it can provide a public benefit like emergency response, wildfires, where I just talked to the state of Oregon. Like they want to use AAM for emergency response, medical transport, those kind of things, rural access. There's this whole area I mentioned, I'm trying to underutilized GA airports and remote locations, rural area. That's been a big equity comment that many of the responders have said. You know, we've got these underutilized GA airports. We want to connect communities that don't have access. We can make some of these early grid investments around these GA airports, not just looking at them from a electric charging or vertiport infrastructure for AAM, but the adoption rate of even electric vehicles in rural areas, it's great in metroplex areas where there's electric charging, but in rural areas, people aren't going to electric because there's no charging for that. So could you utilize a GA airport that is completely underutilized? You've got park, you know, you go to one of them, and that's why Whisk, Archer, and Joby flew out here in general, because nobody was using them. But could they also be an energy producer too? Meaning that, you know, you've got that parking lot, you could put solar panels up there. So there needs to be existing energy sources. So it's not, like I said, it's not just, you know, we're not just because they're electrified, the infrastructure, we have to look at smart ways to also add energy. And our end state is what the industry wants eventually. Who knows when this will be? You know, NASA and FAA, we're talking about 2045. But that's the WIS-defined end state. You know, there's no pilot on board, no safety pilot. You're going to have a scale supervised fleet of operations. And that is like what we see as that full kind of S curve. But in order to get there, we need that infrastructure for autonomy. We need new flight rules. We haven't had new flight rules. We've had IFR since whatever, the 50s. And, you know, are we going to have automated flight rules in these new corridors? And we'll also need multimodal integration. We need autonomous zones, corridors, and we need new energy sources for the grid. I put some of these safety enhanced challenges. This was a question out of the RFI. And some of the areas that the challenges are, you know, we have these human factors research gaps. We have these vertiports that we haven't even figured out the whole safety management systems and the public trust of them. There's also the safety in the urban environment, because now you have a populated area, multimodal, surface traffic, interference. That has not been simulated or tested. And then just like with UAS, in these urban corridors or these low altitude corridors, we've got microclimates, right? And then now you're also thinking about transporting dangerous goods, but also this is also dangerous. You know, you've got the batteries and they're flammable, and you know there's a lot of safety issues there. And then you have the wildlife issue, where there's 70% of bird strikes are at 500 feet and below. So how are you dealing with that with these low altitude corridors? And then, you know, there's all these areas around emergency response with this new infrastructure. Like they haven't figured out the medical, the safety, the fire, all that around the new infrastructure. The other big area that we see is there is a big gap in how we test these new systems. from a holistic approach and from I guess it was called a digital twin. So that we're also looking at that. Are you familiar with AFWorks, the AFWorks, the Air
Yeah.
Force?
Darshan Devarkan is a alum, and he's actually sat in on one of these sessions and been a guest.
Okay, great. Yeah, Dash is great. So AFWorks, the DoD is also floating a lot of these companies by buying their initial set of planes, right? Because they're putting that investment in, and so they have these test ranges at different Air Force bases that they're allowing, Edwards Air Force Base, Eglin, Wright-Patterson, that they are testing these planes in. However, there's not that one-to-one correlation. You're flying something in a desert in Edwards Air Force Base. There's no correlation to that being able to fly safely in the Los Angeles Metroplex, right? How are we going to test that safely without risk of property damage and public? Because you start flying it, it just seemed you can't just start flying it in Los Angeles in a higher tempo. So some of our thinking is the DoD is also invested in this multimodal live virtual constructive testing and building digital twins. So those are things that the government needs to invest in so that we can responsibly integrate these new vehicles into our national airspace system and the whole multimodal. I think that's pretty much it. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I am happy to take questions. I know we're almost out of time, at least. So
well, if you don't mind, I will lead in with a couple, and then I'm going to open it up to students. So folks, start thinking about your questions now. And if you want to start raising your hand icon, I'll try to get you all in order. All right. Well, first off, thank you for that super comprehensive briefing. That was just an excellent detailed coverage of what is going on in this space. That this is the first time we've had somebody from the federal side come in to talk to us about the infrastructure and the intent, where this is headed. What are some of the unique challenges working with such a diverse and engaged set of stakeholders in the AAM field? And what are some of the more pressing issues that they're pushing to be higher priority?
I think one is the amount of stakeholders. It's great that a lot of the people see this as a new technology, the air taxis. I guess let's step back. You wanted to first understand who are the more challenging stakeholders?
No, not names. What are some of the unique challenges that come about from working with folks that are just so engaged, but yet they may have diverse set of motivation? What brings them to the table?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has a different perspective of this. So like Department of Labor and Department of Education, they have to, their perspective is, just around automation and autonomy in general. How are you going to train these new pilots? How are you going to train even the manufacturing? The manufacturing is those that work in the manufacturing industry of it. They are, there's a lot of communities like here in Monterey that have taken that upon themselves to work with at the community college level in these new jobs. So they're so Monterey County is traditionally an agricultural area, they're actually training agricultural workers to work in the automation manufacturing and the composite manufacturing of these aircraft. And then also training them on becoming a pilot, right? Because of simplified vehicle operations, the industry is pushing, they feel through simplified vehicle operations and remote operation centers that they can lower the training barriers. So some of those challenges are that, especially at the local and community, as I mentioned, that's where the rubber meets the road, and we get many comments on them. They really want us to have this workforce plan, in place, and also make sure that it's equitable and not just a for rich use case, because what they saw, this is pre-pandemic, and then I don't know if you read Mark Moore's initial white paper with Uber Elevate, but there was all these videos about AAM. AAM was just a rich taxi service for the rich, right? For people that would pay to bypass congested traffic, again, before the pandemic. So that was always in people's mind. And then when the FAA was trying to push 2028, Innovate 2028 into LA, that caused all the stakeholders there, the community, to think, not in my backyard. We don't want a rich transport. We don't want the noise. We don't want any of that. So that's, the public acceptance of this, the community engagement, the public trust, those are the biggest hurdles of this. The technology is there. As you know, these things are flying. We can fly them remotely. It is, how do we get the public to accept them flying over their head, in an equitable way, and to get and to provide them that these also have, and to show that there's societal benefits to them, to that, from in terms of manufacturing jobs, new pilot jobs, new capacity, underutilized general aviation airports. So those are the big things that we try to tackle in the national strategy, because if we don't do that, this industry won't scale. It may be a helicopter replacement at best, right?
Yeah, and that I can see that challenge of addressing, what's commonly called NIMBYism, to really build up the altruistic benefits of this. And one of the things the folks that are in on this session we're 8 weeks into the examination of this technology, and they've seen use cases where there is notable benefit beyond just the initial. A platform may have been introduced as a good photo base, to support whether it's multimedia generation, movie making, whatever. But that high quality sensor that was shrunk down, it added ability to sense things in a much finer detail. It allowed longer endurance. Well, that then in turn means we can use it for search and recovery for longer and more effective uses. We can use it for wildlife tracking. We can use it for all these different use cases that maybe people had envisioned, but the technology wasn't feasible. Now, with advances in other areas, we've gotten there. So I think we're starting to see that in this eVTOL and advanced air mobility space, where, yeah, it's going to be expensive. And we as a class talked about this last week, of the price per mile. The initial introduction, the numbers have gone anywhere from $3.50 up to $12 per mile, to a desired rate of closer to 50 cents. We know this is going to be something that takes time. It takes investment. And if you don't have enough of them, it'll never be affordable. So I really appreciate how you made that point about if we don't succeed at this, we're just going to see this as a replacement for a helicopter fleet, where I know they wanted that achievement at some point, you know, with the development of rotary wing platforms, but there were just too many barriers, whether it was cost or noise that prevented it. So, well,
Right.
excellent. I do have one more question before I make way for the class to start asking. What are some different ways students, whether undergrad, graduate, you know, whatever stage of their academic pursuit they're at, what are some ways they might be able to get involved in helping to examine, address, or even possibly advance this work? How can they start to get involved outside of their curricula?
Well, I think, you know, there's a lot of community grassroots efforts and even associations out there. Like I was really surprised at the number of comments. Like there's this you know, institute, I have it here, the Advanced Air Mobility Institute. There are also industry associations like Gamma, but there's also airport associations like I made there, and then there's the Community Air Mobility Institute. But there's also these, what I mentioned, these local grassroots organizations, like here in Monterey Bay, there's a drone automation robotics technology 5013C, where they're really engaging the community, trying to bring in these manufacturing jobs like through Joby. But also, I mentioned there's the big agricultural workforce here. And then, so they're also getting trained in ag tech. I see, you know, I don't know where most of your students are. This is worldwide, it may be a virtual, but there's a lot of robotics, automation associations. The AUVSI chapter is in most of the cities. One of our chief scientists, he's right now, I think next week he's doing the keynote speech at the North Carolina chapter with who Dash from AFWorks is the president of. I've done the AUVSI New England, AUVSI Silicon Valley. AUVSI is a great institute organization to get involved because, you know, they had sent out, I don't know, a 30-page response. They're very involved in UAS rulemaking, AAM. I think that's a great organization. You know, again, you know, look in your local area. And I mentioned that with the general aviation airports, there's the airport directors or the director of aviation, the state officials. I just met with Kenji Sugahara, who's the director of aviation in Oregon, who wants to use AAM for wildfire management, right? Those are great areas to start out with, and we welcome that. So those are just my suggestions.
Well, I very much appreciate you giving the shout out to AUVSI. I'm on the Florida Peninsula chapter board. And by the way, class, all of you are eligible for student membership. It's I'll put it in the discussion board with the recording of this and a bunch of other resources I've been gathering. Essentially, it's free with your tuition. The university provides that connection there. So definitely get involved with AUVSI.
Yeah. And then, you know, the other chapters, again, I belong to IEEE and AIAA. They just, they have an autonomy committee. They also have, they started their very first, this took 6 years to happen. I try to convince them of this. They now have a multimodal steering committee in the AIAA, the first time ever, because they always saw themselves as separate than all the other modes. So those are two other organizations. There's great papers that get written it published by IEEE and AIAA.
Outstanding. Well, class, now is the time for you to ask your questions. Go ahead and use your hand raise icon.
There's a question in the chat or no? Okay.
Let me see. Yeah, if you can't access your microphone for some reason, go ahead and here we go. All
Okay,
right, from Mary.
You
mentioned
okay.
You mentioned that currently China is dominating the production and development of drones and batteries. Can you describe how this affects the technology advancements and enhancements of advanced air mobility systems and the implementation and development of new hubs nationally?
Well, I see drone. So there's two things there. China does produce 90% of the drones and 90% of the the batteries and electric vehicles. As far as we want to bring, and when we talk to Joby and all those other companies, they want to bring the battery chemistry and the development of batteries back into the United States. However, I think there was an article, and it's in Marketplace, and I had it where that even if we try to bring it back, China, the raw materials, the lithium, the battery chemistry, they're about 10 years to 15 years ahead of us. So that's how long it would take to catch up. When we also talk about the drones, China has a lot lenient rules, and they're building, and also in the AV world, they can build digital infrastructure right away. We're always talking about V to V, V to V, V to X. They are also doing V to I in these autonomous corridors, using the infrastructure also as a safe way. So when we throw out an electric vehicle, an automated vehicle, it's really not relying on infrastructure because it's not there. We don't have it there. But in China, they've been able to build that digital infrastructure out quickly, much quicker than we're able to do, because it's the same thing. We need to get communities involved. There's all these other rules and regulations. And their ability to get these types of vehicles in that have these large amount of data and the data sharing, they're also able to use a lot more training data sets for machine learning for their edge cases, because there's an infinite amount of edge cases there too. So they're also ahead in the algorithms approach. I don't want to say this is a doom or gloom thing. We developed drone technology, we developed, AAM. But because we're not able to do the flying and the testing of, flying a drone one-off in Alaska is a lot different than throwing up 1,000 drones that communicate with each other. And what they even see within, like, when you throw, 1,000 drones up, they're also using them as weather sensors. Like one drone, may have a totally different microcurrent that's happening to them. So China is getting a lot of these learnings that we haven't been able to get because, the not in my backyard, the public safety, the perception, the public acceptance piece of the drones. It's the same thing like with, you've been involved with AUVSI, I think it's Wing, that they had to do all the drone deliveries out in Australia. And then they're finally coming here in Texas. So we just we're a democracy, right? And sometimes it's sort of like, there's 12 people holding up the government shutdown. We're always listening to that common denominator, lowest common denominator, that has a voice. So China doesn't have that. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Scott, go ahead.
Yeah. So what are some of the international considerations that AAM kind of puts into place? Specifically talking about like cross-border operations, and kind of another second question on top of that is that when we do look to autonomous flying, do you see it more so in the cargo sector first before we see the passenger airline sector move on forward with that?
Well, there's two areas. So some companies are pushing that cargo first use case, like Beta. But then there's other companies that they just want to be passenger carrying. They want to be autonomous whisk. So they're going after different use cases initially. A lot of there's also this whole other group like the Reliable Robotics, Merlin, X-Wing, that they're building these autonomous packages for autonomous cargo. So I don't want to say, will we see autonomous cargo first? We will see it in different types of planes. We might see Reliable Robotics, X-Wing first, but Joby, a lot of them, they don't even care about that. That's not what they want to do. So they're focused primarily on passenger carrying. And you asked about the international cross-border. I don't know much about the EASA cross-border issues. Remember, these are short hop. Right now, it's Volocopter is the one that's going to be tested in Paris. That's a short hop from, Charles de Gaulle Airport into, I think they're building some vertiport for the Olympics. And then same with Osaka, Japan. They're all short hops. They're not cross-border. And same thing here in the United States. These are short hop aircrafts. They're mostly regional, not regional, but urban to suburban environments, rural access. That regional air mobility case is something that, from like Baltimore to DC, they have not yet looked at it. They've been in bigger metroplex areas like Dallas, Fort Worth, LA, and also GA Airport to GA Airport that's within the state. Is that answering your cross-border?
Yep, that does it. Thank you.
Outstanding. Any other questions from those in attendance? Well, with that, I want to just thank everybody for joining us tonight, as well as a major thank you to Sarasina for sharing your thoughts and expertise regarding this technology. This has been just a very informative session that helps us to really better understand the challenges associated with the future of aviation. Class, remember to receive credit for participating in this session. You're going to need to develop a brief overview for next week's discussion prompt, identifying that you are in attendance. Make sure to describe challenges to UNSY capability, functionality, or supportability, as well as discuss the various stakeholders and organizations that are coming together in this space. You're also going to need to discuss any new information you were not previously familiar with and how your overall understanding of this topic has improved. I hope to have the recording from this session uploaded to the discussion area in the instructor corner by tomorrow. With that, let me stop the recording.